Welcome to LBB's Open House, a podcast about how to build brands better. And I'm your host, Suchita Salwan, the co-founder of LBB. On Open House, I have candid conversations with founders, CXOs, and entrepreneurs behind India's most compelling brands. Today, I'm in conversation with Sleepy Owl's co-founder Arman Sood. Sleepy Owl is a new age coffee company that's making good quality coffee accessible to consumers across India through their cold brews, ready to drink coffees, and an array of such coffee-based products. I've known Arman and his co-founders since they launched Sleepy Owl as fresh graduates from law school, that too, and it's been so great to see them expand and grow their portfolio. In this episode, we talk about competition and how at times a rising tide lifts all boats, as it has with the coffee movement, so to speak, in India. Arman also talks about the amount of research and development that goes into launching new products and subcategories for Sleepy Owl. It takes a lot to build a consumer product, that too with a limited shelf life. And in this episode, from fundraising to hiring, his own personal growth as a leader, Arman and I cover all this and more. If you're early in your startup's journey, you will thoroughly enjoy today's episode. Arman is refreshingly honest and upfront, and you'll catch snippets of that throughout today's conversation. Let's jump right in. Guys, welcome to episode 4 of LBB's Open House, a podcast about how to build brands better. And today I have the co-founder of Sleepy Owl, Arman, who's going to give us hopefully the A to Z nuts and bolts of how you guys have been able to build Sleepy Owl as a brand. I'm assuming that little smoke coming from Nietzsche is your hot cup of coffee. Nice. Branding on point. I noticed the t-shirt is as well. I should do this shit too, man, for LBB. We actually have a hoodie, but I ripped it accidentally. So I'm going to brush up on my merchandise. But let's jump right in, Arman. I don't mean to sound like one of those, old ass aunties at weddings, but, I've seen you guys since you were like a tiny ass company and you guys were like 3 law school graduates who were just about wrapping your heads around how you're going to make this cold brew thing a thing. Cut to 2020, where today we have like 1 billion coffee brands and new ones cropping up every day, right? The billion is an exaggeration, guys, but you get the gist. So how does it feel, to be one of the first insurgent brands, but now, one of the very many coffee brands that exist?
I think, Suchita, to be honest, firstly, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. It's an absolute pleasure after hearing season 1 to be here and be a part of season 2. When we started in 2016, we were one of the first, insurgent coffee brands, like you mentioned. And I think today, the fact that there are so many is just a validation of the fact that we were on the right path, right? It validates the fact that there is a demand, for the product that we created and for the coffee category as a whole, right? So I think initially, right in the beginning, we were worried for a little bit about, fine, there are so many new players coming in, but we grew to accept that because we realized that the more the merrier, right? Each coffee brand is going to help expand the pie as a whole, right? And then it was our job to keep doing what we do really well to get a bigger share of that pie, right? I think when we started in 2016, the pie was too small. There were very, very few people who were consuming freshly brewed coffee, and that had to change, right? And it is impossible for one brand to do it alone, right? So I think we, in a way, also gave confidence to more brands to come in and be like, okay, we want to do, play in this space and do something. I think one of the most interesting things that happened, though, is exactly, a year after our launch, Starbucks introduced cold brew across its outlets in India. And at that point in time, people were like, okay, like Starbucks has introduced cold brew. Like, what are you guys going to do? And I think for us, like, it was great because they did spend a lot of money marketing cold brew in India. And that's exactly what we needed, right? Like, for more people to be aware. And I don't, shy away from saying this ever. People are more than welcome to go to Starbucks, try their cold brew, be disappointed, and then come back and find Sleepy Owl. And then, truly begin to enjoy what great coffee is.
I love the point that you brought up about, a rising tide lifting all boats, right? But if you had to sort of expand on what the target addressable market for a company like yours is, are you playing the beverage game? Are you playing the coffee game? You're definitely not playing the, cafe game at all, right?
Correct.
So when you think of your TAM, and also when you think of how your TAM is different to, say, that of a company like Blue Tokai, which also started around about the same time as you, how do you?
They started 4 years before we did, so they have kudos to them. They were, in fact, to be very honest, the first brand to do great quality coffee beans, freshly roasted, brought to a customer. And I think that the path they are on is extremely challenging as well. But they had a 4-year head start on us. And when we came in, we looked at every startup has to solve I think the problem that you face, right? So for us, the problem was that we weren't interested in grinding fresh beans every day and making a fresh cup of coffee. We found that to be too much work for 20 somethings that had just gotten into the workforce, and we felt that there'd be more people like us who want to drink freshly brewed coffee but don't want to go the Blue Tokai way, right? And we made that our problem, right? We made that our mission statement, that okay, it is convenience that we're after, right? We want to make freshly brewed coffee extremely convenient, and all our products from then on, from the beginning, have been focused on convenience, right? So it's not necessarily, I wouldn't say that we're playing in coffee as our TAM or beverage as our TAM, but it's lifestyle, right? Like it's a convenient lifestyle through beverages, through coffee being what we're doing today. But as we move forward, I think there'll be a lot of exciting things that we do in beverage and coffee, and a combination of both down the line. But I think what people have enjoyed from our product portfolio is the ingenuity, convenience, and innovative ways that we build products, right? So yeah.
So what does it take to build convenience? Because, I actually found your like tea bag equivalent of coffee to be genius, because again, I fall into that demo, right? I want a good cup of coffee, but I am like lazy as balls. I, don't know anything about French press. I own all of this equipment. But again, you're lazy, right? And you want someone to do the job for you. I thought your tea bag thing was like great, because it's also, you're used to the behavior, right? You're used to the behavior of, so you're not really changing my behavior. You're just changing the drink that I'm getting as a consequence of that behavior. But what amount of like research and development goes into, each of your products?
So, I think it's one thing that we do is we do our products slow, right? We don't rush with any of our launches, right? Like, of course, had we launched this a year ago, we might have, got greater revenues and market share faster, right? But one thing we do at Sleepy Owl, and we try to do, is like take our time with launches, take our time with product development, so that when we do it right, and we do it well, right? So there's no hurry from our side. Like we do a lot of tastings, a lot of internal checks. We do a lot of research on where the raw material is going to come from, right? So some of our stuff is imported. Some of the stuff is gotten locally, but we do spend upwards of 12 months before launching any product, right? And there's this question of that we ask ourselves, right? Like before launching it, like, is there a demand for it? Do people want it? And more often than not, that answer comes from our customers ourselves, right? So if I were to go back and, when we started with our cold brew bag in box, right, with the tap, that was, adversity is the mother of invention. We didn't have the money to, have a bottling plant or a Tetra Pak or any other packaging method, right? So we used our mind at that time to come up with that, and of course we searched online, what's happening in the world, right? And I think that's something that we do very often, is like look at what's trending, look at the options available globally, look at what brands that inspire us are doing, right? And it's never, I wouldn't use the word imitate or copy, but we do take inspiration from what's happening around the world. And I feel like, that doesn't discount the hard work that it takes to replicate or come up with something similar in India, right? Where doing business is a challenge. And so we had that product, customers loved it, and it was our customers, and we were only serving in Delhi NCR at that time, right? When we were the little babies that came to you and said, listen, LBB, can you talk about this and promote this around, right? Like, let your audience know that we exist. And you guys were kind enough to, help us blow it up at that point. And it was our customers, around, not customers, but people around the country who saw our Instagram page, who saw the beautiful pictures that we shared, that started, asking for it in Bombay, in Bangalore, and elsewhere, right? So we went back to the basics and said, okay, how do we get our product to these states around the country in a cost-effective and simple manner, right? And that led to the product development of the cold brew packs, right? So it was 2 years before we launched that product. One thing that we did was we maintained a database of every single inquiry that ever came in from outside. So when we had the product to launch, we had about 3,000 people to tell that, hey, listen, you asked, we launched, here you go. And from the beginning, it was, it got a very favorable response. Cut to 2019, when we launched our ready-to-drink bottles. Again, it was the customers who asked us for it. They said, the cold brew in a box is available only in NCR. The cold brew packs, very easy, but we don't want to even do that much work, right? So when can I get a ready-to-drink? And we started researching that space, and we realized that between Nescafe at the 35 rupee price point, full of preservatives, and 0.9% coffee, which is on their pack, so I don't consider that cold coffee, and Starbucks at the 300 rupee end with full of sugar and preservatives, again, that's being imported into the country, there was no local upstart doing something in the RTD coffee space. And once we identified that, it again took close to 18 to 24 months to come up with a product that is shelf stable, is preservative free, something that today's day and age of consumer really, really wants. And we put that in a cool looking bottle and started approaching retail stores with it, right? And got into the FMCG side of it. Little did we know that on that shelf you're not competing in coffee, you're competing in beverage then, right? You're competing for the mind space of anyone who wants to go from water to Coke to the coffee. And it's been extremely challenging, but that's what led to that product coming. Again, it was our customers who asked. The hot brew, on the other hand, was an interesting story. Nobody really asked for a tea bag with coffee in it. Nobody thought about that. Our customers didn't tell us, but we did experience seasonality in our business, right? Where we had dark and cold winters and disappointing winters with nothing much to do because we were unable to to garner enough attention and revenues at that point in time. And we asked ourselves, right, like India is a country where people have hot tea and hot coffee, right, a lot. And even on the hottest day in the summer, people have a hot cup of coffee when they wake up. So we decided that we have to do something in the hot coffee space, but it has to have the sleepy owl charm to it. It has to have the sleepy owl, ingenuity to it, right? And again, we're not the first people in the world to do this. There were, I would say 2 brands that we found globally that were trying this out and doing it at a small scale, one in the US and one in the UK. And we said, okay, is it possible to do it here? Like, can we figure it out? And we went pillar to post trying to find the right machine and the right paper to come up with this, right? Neither of which was easy because in India, tea bags have 1.5 to 2 grams of tea in them, right? We wanted to put between 10 to 15 grams of coffee in a pouch. And it took a long time, but we cracked the code. And, I think this is, it's a fun product that we're, again, getting a great response to. So that's our product development cycle. It's time consuming, but well-researched.
So I want to double tap on what's consistent across your product line, which is just your brand, right? And the way you're able to almost humanize this, approach of drinking coffee. And I want to get into that because it also ties in with the question of, what happens when you've got 600 competitors that come out of nowhere, right? I'm sure market may be growing, but all of you guys end up chipping a little bit away into each other's spaces and territories, right? And I think you guys have, and this is my personal opinion, but you guys have done a stellar job of your branding. Is that something you actively invest in? And what does that mean, for you as a co-founder?
So yes, I think other than our products being very unique in themselves, right? So there was a point when I could probably, when someone asked me, okay, who are your competitors? And we would say, well, in terms of product, no one. But in terms of mind share, yes, we have a lot, right? Because when someone thinks coffee, they could think of 10 brands, right? But when it comes to a particular type of coffee or product, we're the only ones. And we enjoyed that space. Now I can see that is also going away because we have brands that are coming up doing products very similar to ours.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, to think about it, we realized early on that, the only way to differentiate ourselves or what might be our moat would be brand, right? But brand is a consequence of, stellar product coupled with stellar service, right? And from the get-go, we've been very, very anal and focused on the kind of customer experience that we want to deliver, right? So whether it is all the products that we send out and the kind of packaging we go, the unboxing experience, we send a little magazine that our marketing team writes into the product, something that engages customers. During the lockdown, when we stopped sending that magazine, we had people say, listen, where's the magazine? So it's small things like that, right? When customers get very particular about the way you've been doing something, that they love you for what you do, right? Of course, we realize that merchandise, clothes, all of these things add to building your brand out, right? We've been again on the social media front very, very particular about the kind of partnerships we do, the kind of collaborations we do, the kind of content that goes out on our pages, right? There's and I'm the one who comes to my co-founder Ashwajit, and I'm like, listen, can we talk about this, and can we post this? And more often than not, he says no, because nothing should dilute the kind of messaging and positioning that you are trying to create. And we almost have a no questions asked replacement policy. No questions asked freebie policy. So if a customer is ordering product X and wants a little bit of product Y, we do it, even if it might be a slight loss at that moment to us, because we always try pleasing our customers and giving them that experience that they will not get anywhere else, right? That's what makes us different from our competitors in the space. And I truly believe in brand marketing, right? Is what I would like to call it, or something that I said recently was brand market fit, right? Like, while it takes time to achieve product market fit, I want people around the country to, when someone tells them that, hey, have you heard of Sleepy Owl? They should have heard of it. They should know that this exists, whether or not they've tried the product, right? The brand should, in their mind, evoke a certain emotion, a certain feeling of positivity and happiness. And I think that is the first step towards converting them to customers in the future. Yeah. So me wearing my merchandise on this show, or having my cup, I try and do this everywhere I go, right? Like, be the brand, represent, and, be in people's faces in a good way.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that, because even with LBB, I always joke saying we found brand market fit before we found product market fit. But like you correctly said, it all adds up, right? When you sort of join the dots at hindsight, all of those little pieces, add up to a larger impact. I want to segue into, the second part of finding product market fit after you found brand market fit is figuring out distribution out, right? You guys started fairly direct to consumer, and, you've sort of branched into e-commerce, marketplaces, and of course, retail as well, right? Which is a super complicated landscape unto itself. Could you talk me through, two things? And let's start with the first one. How did you choose when to, sort of expand into what? And what were the points of inflection that you were sort of, thinking through while saying, hey man, let me get into modern trade? Was it product related? So if we could maybe just jump into that.
So when we started out as a strictly D2C brand, right? We did not have any retail or any Amazon or BigBasket at that point. And for us, that worked out really well, because I think getting customers to experience the brand directly and controlling that entire experience from thought to action, where they order, to receiving the product, to the follow-up emails that we send, to giving them the necessary phone calls to, talk to them about it, get feedback. We control that entire cycle, right? So for the first, 2 years, we were just D2C. While I believe in hindsight, maybe that slowed us down on the marketplaces, etc. But people still knew that, where do you get Sleepy Owl? Their website. There was nowhere else to get it, right? Like, that's where they come to buy the product. And I think, that allows us to own the data and, and treat it fairly and do it well. Of course, again, like I said, it wasn't us initially that said, okay, we also have to do retail and we also have to do Amazon. Retail happened by chance, where customers, wanted product available at stores near them. And that got us thinking that, okay, do we have a retail friendly product, right? And this was before we launched the bottles, right? So we started retail at a small scale, right? By that, I mean, and here to young entrepreneurs maybe listening to this, thinking of a retail product. No, I did not go to Food Hall, Modern Bazaar, and Nature's Basket first, right? we ourselves went to the local Kirana stores near us and the what I call A+ stores, right? And we went and convinced these independent store owners in neighborhoods that we believed our online customers were, right? So we used the online data to understand, okay, this is where I get my orders from. Went to the best stores in those areas, and our first 50 to 60 stores were individually convinced by the founders to keep the product. And we started learning, okay, what is the movement like? How is it picking up? Is there enough demand? How often are we repeating it? What is the store throughput like? What is the same store sales growth like month on month, to see if repeat customers are coming back to the stores and picking it up. And closer to the launch of our bottles is when we actually started, investing money into getting into Limache, Modern Bazaar, 24/7, etc. Right? And by then, we had a fair understanding of how the retail space works in terms of listing, in terms of movement, in terms of sampling, which was another very interesting, maybe for another day. How we cracked the sampling code, of course, took great inspiration from the likes of Winjeans and Epigamy or Rock Recipe and other brands that did sampling, and we did it our own way, and it was a very successful project to get people to try. It's about building trials, building awareness, right? Because the more people try, they get convinced towards buying, right? Like very often on your product could be on a shelf or on your website, but people are afraid to give their money, right? So they've tried it somewhere. And of course, to couple that, acquisition did happen through LBB hosted events, other food festivals, where we, again, the main focus was not sales, but trials, right? So yeah, that's kind of how we entered the retail landscape. Amazon, on the other hand, happened a bit later for us, and we were very late to the Amazon party, but better late than never. When we jumped onto Amazon and BigBasket, the response was phenomenal from the get-go. We realized very late that, okay, customers don't necessarily only want to order from your website. Amazon does offer unparalleled convenience with respect to quicker deliveries, right?
Yeah.
And around the country, that is. Like from Delhi, when we dispatch our goods, it takes 3 to 4 days to reach anywhere in the country at the least. Post-COVID longer. But Amazon still maintains its 24-hour delivery, right? And when we are available on Amazon Prime, there is a customer that wants us quicker, gets us from there, right? Also, I think with the number of upstarts in the market right now, many customers might not want to go from website to website and have 20 delivery guys coming to their house and getting different emails, etc. Amazon just makes it easier to build your basket. Even BigBasket makes it easier to couple all your products together. So being on these platforms has its advantages. And however, it's not easy. You can't just list on the platform and expect to do very well, right? So again, here my advice and our learnings have been going first on our website, building that consumer trust has been extremely helpful to allow us to succeed on Amazon, right? And of course, Amazon and BigBasket, fortunately or unfortunately, are based on the relationships you have with the teams that are giving you the purchase orders, that are helping you with your promotions, that are advising you on what how to advertise on these platforms, right? So it is a lot of hustle in terms of having the right relationships and the right contacts. But to expect that you list on these platforms and automatically get sales is something that can never happen. And for us, thus having a strong website and strong brand prior to listing has been very, very helpful.
I think what you said is so important, because I feel like this is a big mistake that I've seen a lot of brands make, where they feel that listing is equal to sales, but that's not how it works. And like you correctly said, you need to, it's just about creating those touch points across the internet, right? Because you never know where your sale happens. Whether your sale happens on your website, on LBB, Amazon, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's about, just having that almost billboard-esque strategy where you're in enough places and you're using different tools to, tackle all different parts of the customer's marketing funnel. So if we had to, within this construct of distribution, how difficult is it to create differentiated ways of distributing? Because now even platforms and channels have sort of become omnipresent, right? Where every customer, in the sense, has access to, an Amazon, BigBasket, LBB, Instagram, Facebook, and to an extent it comes down to how many dollars you have in your pocket to really build yourself on any of these platforms, right? Have there been things that you've tried that have been really interesting in terms of just customer acquisition or even customer retention, which you want to talk about?
Okay, so on the customer acquisition front, right, like I think our first focus has always been our website, right? Like, because again, like I said, you own the customer, you own the experience of the customer, right? And that's extremely important. So, of course, we've invested a lot of dollars on Facebook, Instagram, and Google being the three primary channels of paid acquisition that most brands go to, right? And we've had our share of success and failure, with marketing using these platforms. So I would say that it's been fairly tough, but we have had cycles where we've had great return on advertising spend, and then it's gone down, and we've really had to rack our brains on figuring out how to bring it back to a level where it is acceptable to continue to use these platforms to advertise. And I think we've never worked with agencies. All our creative content is done in-house, but we work with freelancers that we can find that are willing to dedicate themselves to the brand in its growth, and that's been what's worked for us on these platforms. With respect to Amazon and BigBasket, right? With Amazon, yes, we do invest a significant amount, and the returns are fairly good. But again, there's a lot of help that you need from the Amazon advertising team and the guidance, of how to crack the system. BigBasket, on the other hand, we were a part of the BigBasket Accelerator program, and that was a great phase for us where you get into households, and of course it's slightly discount oriented where you have to throw a lot of discounts. And we've had situations where customers have come to our website and told us, listen, website you're available at 500, on BigBasket you're available at like 420. What the hell? And that again is a sign that not just that, I mean, the fact that they've done that is a sign that they love the brand and they care and that they know and that they're aware of these things, right? So keep in mind, you can't get away with trying to, play the customer. The customers are the smartest. And we learned that as well, right? And we pulled back from BigBasket. We said, listen, we'll be a part of the program and we'll continue, but more than 10% never happening. Like, we will not give more discount than that, because that's not something that is feasible for us, right? And our customers, realize this as well. So, and you have to be very, very aware of this, right? So we've scaled back from BigBasket a little bit, but it's been you have to mix it up. I'd say you can't rely too heavily on just one channel, right? Amazon was April 2020 when the lockdown happened, right? Our sales on Amazon in that month was zero, right? But we were able to get our website up and running very quickly within 5 days once we had our passes and stuff. And April was a good month, and then May, June, July got better. And while Amazon recovered, we had our website to fall back on, right? And we had retail at that point in time as well. With retail, also, my advice would be, to be very, very careful in terms of throwing away listing fees, right? It's very tempting. First you need to have the backing to pay that listing fee. It's not, anyone starting out without funds. It's not easy to, afford to pay that fees. So definitely start out with smaller stores and get your learnings there, right? Before you invest into the bigger store. Because again, being on a shelf doesn't mean you're selling, right? Not at all, right? Keep in mind, when you are at even 1,000 stores, the 80-20 rule applies, right? The 80% of your sales come from 20% of your stores, right? So yeah, you have to have a keen eye on your distribution mix and how you are spending on that mix.
Speaking of deep pockets, let's get into fundraising, because out of all the D2C brands that may exist, some Me Too's of yours, some in other categories, obviously everyone hasn't been able to raise money the way you guys have, right? They're also from fantastic investors like DSG, etc. How, first off, what did it take for you to convince, seasoned investors to put money into Sleepy Owl, especially given that, you guys were 3 young law school graduates hustling your way through making this coffee business happen?
So, when we started out, right, I think it was, like you said, we were young college graduates still figuring our shit out, right? Like we had the brand, we launched it. The first few months were, the sales were okay, and it was growing slightly. We didn't really think 3, 4, 5 years ahead as to what needs to go on. And when we started thinking about, I think one of the first things that happened was when the team from DSG Consumer Partners actually called us. And, so we, I think, had a good Instagram, a good website. The product had received decent feedback, from the customers. And somehow, Rajiv from Sula Wines had received our product in Bombay. Someone sent it to him. And he told Deepak and team that this is one of the best coffees he's tried. So there's no better way to garner interest than great word of mouth and, recommended feedback. So they called us. And I still remember I was, Ajay and I were in the room, just sitting on the bed because we didn't have an office. We were manufacturing in the house, and this was 3 months in. And they inquired about the business, and we were doing less than 1 lakh rupees of sales in a month. And when we told them that, they were baffled because we looked much bigger on the outside at that stage also than we were actually. And they said, okay, keep in touch. We want to be in touch. And that's when we got the first inkling that, man, like we're onto something, like these guys expressed interest and like there might be others. And we started figuring out, okay, like, there's this whole like fundraising thing that we can do to grow faster. And we were recommended to a financial consultant, a banker of sorts, who came to us and said that, listen, I will not take your mandate to any investor because you guys are too small. So he kind of set us a target and said, listen, if you can grow 10x in the next 6 to 7 months, I will take your mandate. Even that won't be enough, but I will take your mandate. And we, put our heads down, did the work, hit that number, and then we went back to market. And this time we didn't go back just to DSG. We decided that we should explore, the market as a whole. And we, started pitching to investors. Of course, we met maybe 35 to 40 investors, lots of rejections, lots of, repeat pitches, trying to explain what we're up to. And DSG was kind enough to still understand, being one of the leading food and beverage investors, having invested in the best of food and beverage companies, they understood what our long-term play was. What were we going for? What are we hitting at? What can we stand for? And they said, listen, we want right of first refusal. So if you are going to raise, just think about us. And that was very heartening for us as well. And we picked them, and I think it was a great decision because they have continued to back us for anyone starting out. And I think my piece of advice would be, I was on a call yesterday with a young entrepreneur who is trying to do something in the mock meat space, right? And he doesn't have a product yet. He's figuring it out, but he had lots of questions around fundraising, right? And my only answer to him was, till you pitch to anybody, go to friends, family, convince them. We did the same thing, right? If you have, HNIs that or people in the industry that get some money. But until you prove some traction, until you prove that you can work, see, because people don't necessarily invest in, even when we were invested in DSG, I don't think they invested in the business, they invested in the team, right? They believed that we were the right people to launch the RTD. They believed that we were the right people to champion the cause for coffee, and not the business per se at that point in time. We were too small to be exciting for anybody, right? So I told him the same thing. I said, just prove yourself. Prove that you can get some traction in the market before you worry about fundraising, right? Unless you come from, having previously exited a startup or, having worked at some of the big FMCG companies, it's very tough to raise on an idea.
Yeah.
Right? So that's my 2 cents about fundraising. And I think, once you prove yourself, you will have, interest from the right people.
So as a young founder and also someone who's new to this space, what are the expectations that, you set vis-a-vis your investors, right? And what have you learned from your investors, which has actually been an interesting takeaway for you?
So, I think very often, so one thing that we've learned from our investors is to value our brand, right? Like understand that, it's very tempting for us, Suchita, to want to, do a good instant coffee, for example, right?
Yeah.
It's very tempting for us to also want to open cafes and play in that space, both of which might be bigger TAMs, or might drive our revenue up in the short term, right? But from their advice, we understood that we're building a long-term brand and we're playing a long-term game. So they have been very kind in terms of, not having, I would say, sky-high expectations and quick returns, right? They are also in it for the long haul with us, right? They do understand that they're global investors, right? So they have seen the cold brew and the coffee market in the UK, Singapore, and the US be far ahead of where it is right now in India, right? So they've supported us from that perspective. I think the next thing about having seasoned investors is that they have your back in future fundraising rounds, right? So when you are raising money, you have to know that you're partnering with someone, you're bringing someone into bed with you, and you have to have trust that they will fight with you and go with you on the long haul. During the pandemic, we've had almost weekly calls with Deepak and team, with updates, with plans, with figuring it out, knowing that, we have the advice of them and their portfolio, right? Like all of the portfolio companies are a phone call away when we need advice, when we need help, when we need a contact, they come through in that manner as well. And last but not the least, they're urging us, and we ourselves are now trying to build a ship that is unit economic positive, that is cash flow positive as far as possible. We don't have the growth at all costs mindset, right? Because that is not how, especially in FMCG or food, like that's not how a business is built. You can't be perpetually loss making and expect that. So during the last 6 months, we've actually made major improvements with the assistance of our investors to turn things around, and make better deals and make better decisions. So I think if you choose your investor wisely, then you'll be on the path to doing the same thing.
And who do you guys look up to? Like when you think of best business practices, like crazy good unit economics, who are the companies that you're tracking or that you're really inspired by?
So I think Epigamia is a company that I would say that we know Rohan, and we have.
He's so cool. I thought I spoke fast, and then I heard him speaking, and I was just like, "Hold on, buddy. I can only comprehend at X speed."
Yeah, see, I mean, if you come to think of it, right, Greek yogurt was a brand new category, so was cold brew, right? They had their challenges with cold chain and distribution. We have our challenges with distributing our product as well. They have worked hard to convince people in the country to understand what flavored Greek yogurt is, or what a Greek yogurt smoothie is, and all of that. So, and now with their honestly with their coconut yogurt, which I'm a big fan of, and
it's excellent,
right?
Yeah,
they've gone into what I would call a niche category, right? I think our products are fairly novel and niche as well, at least to start with. And so we are both creating categories, right, and trying to expand the market and share of the pie and stuff like that. So I think we're definitely in the Indian scenario, definitely inspired by them. Globally there are so many, Suchita. There are so many brands doing such fantastic stuff, from Chameleon Cold Brew, which was acquired by Nestle. You have what's it called? You have Califia Farms.
Okay.
Blue Bottle is great, but they again are cafe side, so we definitely inspired by them, but not as closely because they are cafe side. High Brew Coffee is another one that is very, very cool. That has again done a massive job of creating fantastic products.
So what's a long game for you guys? Is it building a sustainable cash generating FMCG brand? Is it acquisition? Because that's a route that a lot of brands end up sort of taking, right? And good outcome on all sides. Yeah. When you think, and I know early days, you guys are still 4 or 5 years into the journey. What's a long game from your perspective?
I think, see, again, at the end of the day, founders, or us, we started a business, of course, to get, for ourselves and our investors to generate a good return, right? So whether that happens through IPO or acquisition, all paths are open for us. We're not, I think it's too early even now for us to, worry about that side of it, right? We'll see what is to come. But what I can tell you is that, we have consistently delivered very innovative and very interesting products that I truly believe has added a lot of value to the ecosystem, that has added a lot of value to people's lives, right? Like if I were to go back and, go through all the emails, messages, phone calls that we've received from customers and the love that we've received for them, we've definitely created real impact, right? We are not a Me Too product. We don't intend to launch Me Too products in the market, right? As lucrative as that might be financially. We have pushed the bar over and over again with what we've done. And I think that, we want to keep doing that, right? Because I think that is what will make us exciting, even if it's for an acquisition, right? Even if it's for, an IPO or whatever it is, right? I think doing novel, innovative things is what's going to keep us afloat, and we want to keep doing that.
So I want to switch into like last gear of this conversation, which is, you obviously started out fairly young, similar to me where, I was whatever, 22, 23 when, I kicked off LBB as a side project. I'm sure you've grown a lot, right? And with you, it's not just you, it's, working with two other co-founders who are also, young and figuring things out as they go along. What's been your personal journey, man? How have you changed over the past 4-5 years?
It's been, I think, like you said, we started out very young. We were 20, 24, 25, 24 when we actually started Sleepy Owl Coffee. There was, we started on an itch, right? Like we wanted to scratch our itch. We were like, we want to do something on our own. This is the time. We're young. We can take risks. We don't have families who depend on us. In fact, we were very lucky to have families that supported us. Our seed funding, to clarify to everybody, came from our parents. And we're extremely, extremely grateful for that. Support and belief that they had in us. That wasn't a battle to fight. We got an easy start, I would say. I guess we've learned to become very responsible with money. We've learned to, understand how to keep, I'm still figuring this out. Because we're business owners and we also represent the business, like you have to be intelligent about what you say as a person, right? Like I might voice my personal opinions against the government and this and that, but you have to understand where to draw the line because you also represent Sleepy Owl and what it stands for, right? And the two can't collide. That's been tough for me because I'm very, very vocal and very,
I feel your pain, man.
Yeah.
I feel your pain.
Yeah.
I feel like my colleagues are always just kicking my foot saying, just stop, woman.
That's been tough. I think, the three of us, right? We're like friends first, right? There's always this debate that we hear, right? Should you start a business with your friends or should you not start a business with your friends?
Yeah.
Right? I think I would always prefer starting a business with someone I know and already trust rather than a stranger, right? I think that knowing each other, having each other's backs is something that we absolutely trust each other and know that we have each other's backs and that come what may, we're going to put each other and our, best interests along with the companies first, right? Like this is how it is. And that we also tell ourselves that, we're the power of three, right? Most we there are three minds, six hands working together to create something. So we've, fortunately from the get-go had very, very clear roles and responsibilities. In fact, in the first 2 or 3 months we didn't, and it was a, massive havoc. And, we sat down and we said, okay, this is what you do. This is what you do based on each other's understanding, consensus, interests. Till day, we don't overlap on our roles. And of course, I got, the other two live together. Ajay and Ashwin still live together. I got married and now I live separately. And I moved out and I was living separately from before. So we navigate our, personal time, friendship, our relationships with each other alongside, work. And that's tough, but we learn every single day of doing this, right? So yeah, it's exciting. We're very happy to be on this journey together, right? And we hope that when we're old, we look back and are happy with all the decisions that we made. And yeah.
What's one event that's happened in the past 4-5 years that's actually been transformative to you as a leader? If there is any one incident or event.
I think I would say COVID, right? When COVID hit, right? March 24th or whenever the lockdown was announced, right? The next 10 days were very trying because I knew at that moment that having a delivery product, right, in the food space, we have to function, right? We have to absolutely function because this was our time to gather more market share, be available to our consumers as well as new consumers who might discover us, right? And I think those 7 days took me back to, early days of starting up, right? Because I think I was back on the road, right? I spent hours at the police station trying to get passes, hustling, calling people, doing all kinds of jugaad, how I got the passes is another story, but it is, and that actually reminded me of the very early days of, the first year of Hustle where, we would deliver products ourselves, where I, would go for every single pitch myself, where we, did all the office tastings ourselves, even at your office, right? So it kind of showed me that even as we grow, right, I think I don't want to be a Lala type founder who sits on a chair and passes orders, right? I think that being on the ground, being with your team, being in the front of the battle lines is what counts, right? And for me, that was transformative because I again realized that okay, even if that might have reduced in the year 2, 3, where of course we had additional responsibilities, you can't keep doing that, but it should be there. You should have that mindset. Let's put it that way, right? The mindset has to be the same. You can't let that, you can't become lazy in your mind about it, because the team has grown, right? We're now 65, 70 people strong, right? So of course, if I want something done, I can call someone and have it done, right? But there is some charm in getting your hands and feet dirty.
Yeah, no, I second you on what COVID did. Literally similar to you, same with me. It was just so nice to have that sense of fight or flight again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because again, there are very few incidents that actually put you in that situation or like pressure test you into, you're either going to come out of this or this is going to just go downhill from here. And that, you just feel that like crazy power from within you to, push one day more.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, COVID's actually been great. It's been a really humbling experience, I think, for any single founder out there.
Absolutely.
Okay, last 2 questions for you. First one, what are Indian brands that are in your little black book that you think everyone must try out apart from Sleepy Owl?
Okay, so might sound biased, but
I know what you're going to say. Atmosphere kombucha.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like Atmosphere kombucha. Like not because my wife is the founder, but because I absolutely love their product.
It's a fantastic product. Yeah.
I know the heart and soul with which they build it. Like it's beautiful. Happy Jars. Biggest fan of their products, and again, it's a space that's extremely cluttered. But I feel like when your product is that phenomenal, like. Absolutely worth trying. I'm thinking of what else. I think, I would, most of the new tonic water brands, like I don't have, one preference yet, but I think Swami is fantastic. It's a really, really good product. I love Anand and his gin. I think that's another really cool product. And in the beer space, Goa Brewing Co. Hint, hint, collaboration is on.
Oh, fun! They're so good.
Yeah, it's really good. Again, what I like is that it's not mainstream, right? Like it's still local, artisanal. Like even Atmosphere is Delhi-based. Goa is pretty much Goa-based. So yeah, these are a few of the products that I absolutely swear by.
So fun fact: Happy Jars launched on LBB.
Nice.
Yeah. So we were like the first platform to list them. And I know Surbhi from when, again, I sound like an auntie, but like I know her from when she was at Fab India and, working on this as a side project. And yeah, to our listeners, apart from the alcohol brands, you can get all the tonic waters and Happy Jar and Atmosphere on LBB shops. So check that out. Okay, last question for you. A book, podcast, video series that you think anyone starting a brand or building a brand must listen to or read or whatever?
Okay, I think podcast Guy Raz, like most definitely how I built this. I've been listening to it for the last few years, and then obviously he just launched his book, which I think was a phenomenal read as well. Definitely worth reading. Another book, without saying, Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, like phenomenal read. Like will totally inspire you to get up and like start doing things. So that was book, podcast, and.
Any video series, any of that?
I don't think I've been, keenly following any video series. Any recommendations?
There's this really funny video series. It's like a Spark Notes, but like a hip hop version. It's called. I'll send you the link. It's so funny. It's basically like thug reviews.
Nice.
So basically there's this like, jacked up like black guy who basically gives you like a hip hop-esque review of the deepest books. And I don't know if you read this book called Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse or whatever.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
So he gave, you have to watch this. It is so funny, but it is like the best breakdown of his book. And also Y Combinator's, Stanford's startup school. That they did in collaboration with Y Combinator. Those videos are impeccable.
I'll check this out. Again, without sounding childish or silly, but video series is Shark Tank, man. Like, I've been through 10 seasons of it, and like, yeah, as reality TV as it might be, but I think if you can just watch and then draw certain things out of each pitch, each episode, each story, each hustle, and feedback that they give. And of course, it doesn't stop at that. I usually, the brands that I like, I research them separately, right? And one of the interesting brands or scenarios that happened was a brand called Super Coffee that got rejected on Shark Tank, right? But went on to now it's a $100 million business.
Holy
right?
shit.
So you check out Super Coffee, and they were rejected by Shark Tank, right? So again, it's a story that when they pitched, I was like, oh, okay, good, great, they should get funded. But there were reasons why they didn't at that point in time. And then they were resilient enough to go back and build it out, right? And they're doing phenomenal business today. So, I mean, it's just stories, right? It's stories that come to you through that. So video series would be Shark Tank.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Arman. I have learned a lot. I've made a bunch of notes. Where can people find you? Twitter, Instagram, email, whatever?
Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, or email, anywhere. I think, one rule of thumb that I have is if you get in touch, 100% I will respond and will engage with you. I think that for me is what really disappoints me is when you genuinely reach out to someone and they just don't give you the time of day or never get back to you or acknowledge your existence. It feels like, I'm not saying every hi with nothing else will get responded to, but if you genuinely reach out, I would love to engage with people. It's my favorite thing to do. I'm always making friends, talking to people, learning about new business, sharing these insights even one-on-one, right? It's great that now, thanks to you, this is a great platform to share my experience. But I'm always happy, to answer questions and queries to people reaching out. And of course, one of the smarter reasons to do this is because at the end of any conversation, I subtle pitch. Have you tried Sleepy Owl? Can you please try it? It's a great quality product.
New distribution channel.
Yeah, because it helps, right? So, I mean, even if I were to talk to, 3 new people in a week, right? They are potential customers. They are potential, they might have a good conversation with you and tell somebody that, oh, okay, by the way, I spoke to Thing and maybe you check out their product, right? Because I'll tell you something interesting. When we started, right, one of the things we told ourselves is that coffee, other than being addictive, is something that people tell their friend circle about, right? So if I can convince one person in a friend circle to fall in love with the product, he will be the voice for the rest of his crew.
Yeah.
Right. And tell them about it. Right. So that's how the, ricochet domino effect works with some consumer products. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, get in touch with Arman and the team at Sleepy Owl Coffee. I have personally seen them grow. They've come for tastings to our office. They've taken part in our events, selling on LBB. And it's just been kudos to you guys, man, because I know how tough it is to build products up in your category. And you guys, like you said, have always pushed the bar and raised the bar. So keep doing that. All the best, man.
Thank you, Surijata.
Thank you for doing this and have a good weekend.